The night Tobias Afolabi-Greene walked onto that stage, nobody in the Ridgecrest Theater had any idea who he was. That was the point. That was always the point. Keep the janitor's son invisible until the curtain fell, and it was safe to pretend the whole evening had gone exactly as planned. His mother, Delia Afolabi-Greene, had cleaned that theater for 11 years. 11 years of mopping the lobby after opening nights, of scrubbing the dressing room mirrors that reflected faces that never looked like hers, of folding the programs that listed names her son would never be allowed to claim. She knew every light bulb in that building. She knew which door in the backstage corridor stuck in February because of the cold, and which sink in the green room dripped if you didn't turn the handle all the way. She knew the theater the way people know their own heartbeat, without thinking, without looking, just by feel. Tobias knew it too. He'd grown up in the wings of that place, doing homework on the prop tables while his mother worked the late shifts, listening to rehearsals bleed through the walls. He'd heard every production Ridgecrest had staged in the last decade. The Chekhov, the Sondheim, the experimental pieces that smelled like art school and went half an hour too long. He'd heard them all from behind the flats, from the shadow of the curtain, from the wrong side of everything. He never complained. Delia had raised him not to. "You carry yourself with dignity," she told him once, ironing his school shirt at 6 in the morning, not looking up. "You carry yourself with dignity, and you let your work say the rest." He was 18 when she said that. He believed her completely. He still believed her, most of the time. But there were moments, and he would be lying if he said there weren't, when dignity felt like a door that only opened from one side. The Ridgecrest Young Players was not officially a school program. It was, technically, a community youth theater attached to the main company, open to applicants between 16 and 24 from across the city of Halifax. Technically. In practice, it drew almost entirely from 2 private schools in the South End and from the children of board members. This was never stated anywhere. It didn't need to be. The audition posters were printed in quantities that found their way to certain bulletin boards and not others. The callbacks happened on Tuesday evenings, which happened to conflict with every public school's late bus schedule. These things were not accidents. They were just never called what they were. The artistic director of the Young Players was a man named Dale Coburn. He had a neat gray beard and wore linen shirts in colors that suggested he had once lived in Portugal. He spoke about theater with the intensity of someone who had almost been successful at it and had spent the subsequent 30 years making sure that feeling stayed mostly buried. He was polite. He was well-read. He had opinions about Brecht that he shared at a volume slightly too loud for the room. He had pulled Tobias aside after the first callback. "You've got something," he said. He tilted his head, studying Tobias the way you might study a piece of furniture that had appeared in an unexpected room. "You've genuinely got something. The monologue was strong. Your instincts are good." Tobias said, "Thank you. I do want to be candid with you," Dale Coburn said. "The Ensemble for Embers has a very specific visual language. The production is set in a small coastal town in 1950s Nova Scotia. We've built the whole design around a particular cohesion. You understand what I'm saying?" Tobias understood exactly what he was saying. "We'd love to have you involved in a support capacity," Dale Coburn continued. "Stage management, perhaps? Or assistant crew. That's where a lot of the real work happens, honestly. That's where you really learn the craft." Tobias went home that night and sat at the kitchen table for a long time without turning on the lights. His mother came in from her shift, still in her work clothes, and found him there. She didn't say anything. She just put a hand on his shoulder and left it there. He didn't tell her what Dale Coburn had said. He told her the callbacks had been moved to a different week, and he wasn't sure about the schedule. He didn't want her to feel what he was feeling, because what he was feeling was not something either of them could afford to feel on a Tuesday night with work in the morning. What Dale Coburn didn't know was that Tobias had already been offered the lead. Not by Dale Coburn. By the playwright. Miriam Samuels Osei was 61 years old, a black Nova Scotian woman whose grandmother had been born in Africville. She had written Embers over 4 years, and she had written the lead role, a young man named August, specifically as a black character. Not incidentally, not ambiguously, specifically. She had said so in every interview. The script said so in its character notes. It was, she had told the Halifax Chronicle, non-negotiable. Dale Coburn had agreed to all of this when he'd acquired the rights. He had agreed to it in writing. He had then proceeded, over the following 6 months, to reinterpret what non-negotiable meant in ways that Miriam Samuels Osei had not anticipated, and that she was finding, as the production date approached, extremely difficult to address through official channels without being made to seem difficult. Tobias had met Miriam at a reading in the North End, a small thing in the back room of a bookshop on Gottingen Street. She'd heard him read a scene, not from her play, just a scene someone had thrown out for the evening, and she'd introduced herself afterward. They'd talked for 2 hours. She'd told him about Embers. She'd said, "If you auditioned, you'd get the role. I can't promise more than that, because the production is complicated, but the role is yours if you want it." He'd auditioned. He'd been offered crew. Miriam found out 3 days later. She called him. She was very quiet on the phone, which he was learning was what she sounded like when she was the most angry. "Don't go anywhere," she said. "I'm handling it." He wasn't sure what handling it meant. He wasn't sure it meant anything that would change how the next 6 weeks went. He agreed to stage manage because he needed the experience credit for his portfolio, and because the alternative was walking away from the only professional theater in Halifax that ran a youth program, and because his mother had raised him to carry himself with dignity and let his work say the rest. He told himself this was what that looked like. He was not entirely convinced. The ensemble that Dale Coburn had assembled for Embers was, as advertised, visually cohesive. There were 9 of them, plus the lead, a 22-year-old from Dalhousie named Fletcher Ward, who had good cheekbones and had been in a regional commercial for a furniture chain. Fletcher Ward was pleasant. He learned his lines reliably and hit his marks and didn't cause problems. He had no particular feel for the play. He spoke August's words like someone reading directions off a map, accurately, completely, arriving nowhere. Tobias watched rehearsals from the booth, or from the wings when he was needed backstage. He watched Fletcher Ward deliver August's monologue in Act 2, the one about his grandfather, about the house that had been taken, about the particular quality of grief that comes from losing something the world refuses to acknowledge you ever owned. And he watched the director nod and say, "Good, that's coming together." And he said nothing. He said nothing for 5 weeks. He learned everything. He learned the show from the inside out. Every cue, every light change, every sound effect, every piece of furniture that needed to move in the dark between scenes. He knew it better than Fletcher Ward knew it. He knew it better than Dale Coburn knew it. He also quietly, in the empty theater on the evenings his mother worked late, ran August lines alone on the stage. Not to perform them, just to hold them, just to know what they felt like in his body, in his voice, in his actual chest, rather than in a script on a clipboard. He didn't think of it as rehearsing. He thought of it as remembering something he'd always known. The production opened on a Thursday in March. Halifax in March is a specific kind of cold, not brutal, not dramatic, just gray and persistent, the kind of weather that makes you feel slightly behind on everything. The Ridgecrest lobby was warm and full of people in good coats, and the programs, which Tobias had helped collate the night before, listed names that were not his. Opening night went adequately. Fletcher Ward was adequate. The audience was polite. The lighting, which Tobias had quietly reprogrammed twice after the lighting designer's original cues kept washing out the upstage scenes, looked better than it had any right to. Miriam Samuels Osei sat in the 5th row and did not look like someone who was watching her play. Friday went the same. Saturday matinee, same. Saturday evening, 3 hours before curtain, Fletcher Ward slipped on black ice in the parking lot behind the theater and fractured 2 bones in his right wrist. Tobias was backstage, checking prop positions, when the stage manager's assistant came to find him. The assistant's name was Philippa. She was 20 and perpetually slightly panicked, and she came around the corner of the prop table with an expression that suggested something had either gone very wrong or slightly on fire. "Dale needs to see you," she said. Dale Coburn's office was small and smelled like old coffee and the particular anxiety of a man confronting a problem he had created. He was standing behind his desk, which was unusual. He was the kind of man who sat behind his desk. Standing suggested that sitting no longer felt like enough. "You know the show," he said without preamble. "Yes," Tobias said. "You know Fletcher's lines." "Yes." Dale Coburn looked at him. There was something in that look that was almost gratitude and almost apology and was not quite either. "We open in 3 hours," he said. "I know. I'd like you to go on tonight. As August." Tobias looked back at him for a moment. He thought about 5 weeks. He thought about the booth. He thought about the empty stage at 11 o'clock at night, and August's monologue, and the particular quality of grief that comes from losing something the world refuses to acknowledge you ever owned. "Okay," he said. "We can discuss." "Okay," Tobias said again. "I'll go on." He walked out of the office and went to wardrobe and didn't say anything else. Philippa found him 20 minutes later in the dressing room, learning that Fletcher Ward and Tobias Afolabi-Greene were not the same size in any meaningful way, and that the costume department was about to perform a minor miracle with 2 inches of fabric and a safety pin. "Miriam's here," Philippa said. "She's asking for you." Miriam was waiting in the hallway outside the green room, wearing a dark coat and the expression of someone who had been right about something for a very long time. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Fine," he said. "Don't say fine." "How do you feel?" He thought about it. "Like I've been waiting to do something for 5 weeks, and I'm not going to waste it." She put both hands on his shoulders. She looked at him the way his mother looked at him sometimes. Not soft, not reassuring, just direct, like she was pressing something important directly through his sternum. "August is your grandfather's grandson," she said. "That's all. Just remember that." He nodded. He did remember it. He had been remembering it for 5 weeks in an empty theater. The curtain went up at 8. There was a brief announcement from the front-of-house manager that the role of August would be performed that evening by a substitute artist. The word substitute artist hung in the air of the theater the way certain words do, not quite landing, not quite dissipating. For the first 10 minutes, the audience was attentive in the way Halifax audiences are politely attentive. Present, receptive, slightly bundled. The ensemble did their work. The set, a kitchen interior, a porch, a road implied by light, looked the way it was meant to look. Then Tobias walked on. He didn't do anything extraordinary in the first scene. He wasn't trying to be extraordinary in the first scene. He was just August, 20 years old in 1952 in a town that had decided what he was before he'd had the chance to say a word about it. He stood in his mother's kitchen, and he had a quiet argument with his uncle about the church committee meeting, and it was the most ordinary scene in the play. But something in the room shifted. Audiences feel things before they know they feel them. There was a stillness that settled in. Not the polite stillness of people being good audience members, but the actual stillness of people who had stopped thinking about their parking and their dinner and were just watching. By the end of Act 1, the ensemble had adjusted. They were acting with him differently than they had acted with Fletcher Ward. Not better or worse in terms of technical proficiency. Differently, like something had come into focus that they hadn't realized was blurry. The intermission was 15 minutes. Tobias stood in the wings and didn't talk to anyone. Philippa brought him water. Miriam appeared at the edge of the backstage corridor for exactly 4 seconds, looked at him, and then went back out to the audience without saying a word. Act 2, Scene 4, August's monologue. The play calls for August to be alone on stage. Just him and a wooden chair and a letter he's holding, written in his grandfather's handwriting, returned to him by a property lawyer who'd spent 6 years tracing it through municipal records. The letter describes a house. Just a house. But August knows what the house was, and the audience, by this point, knows what the house was. And the monologue is about trying to explain the weight of that to a room full of people who will never quite feel it in their own bodies the way he feels it in his. Miriam had written the monologue in 3 sittings over 2 nights. She'd told Tobias that once. "I didn't sleep between the sittings," she said. "I was afraid if I slept, I'd wake up and know how to make it easier, and it wasn't supposed to be easier. Tobias thought about that every time he'd run it alone in the empty theater. He sat down in the chair. He looked at the letter for a moment, really looked at it, not like a prop, like a letter. Then he looked up. He spoke quietly. That was the first thing people would say afterward, that they hadn't expected how quiet it was. Not a performance of grief. Just grief. Just a young man in 1952 holding a piece of paper that was worth everything and legally worth nothing, and trying to find the words for what that meant. He got to the part where August says, "This is what they keep, and this is what they give back. And the difference between those two things is the entire length of my family's life." And he felt it move through the room the way sound moves through water, the way it finds every corner before it stops. When he finished, there was no immediate applause. There was a held breath, 4-5 seconds of it, and then the audience released, and the sound was not quite clapping, not quite anything, just the collective exhale of 200 people coming back to themselves. After the curtain call, and the curtain call went long, longer than any of the previous nights, the ensemble looking slightly surprised by the weight of it. Tobias went back to the green room and sat down on the floor with his back against the wall, because the chairs all had bags and coats on them, and he didn't feel like moving anything. He sat there for a while. Dale Coburn came to find him. He stood in the doorway, and Tobias looked up at him, and Dale Coburn looked back, and there was a long silence in which several things that would never cuts out loud were nonetheless present. "That was," Dale Coburn started. "Thank you for the opportunity," Tobias said. There was another silence. Dale Coburn looked like a man who had something to say that he didn't quite have the vocabulary for, or the courage, or possibly both. He opened his mouth once and then closed it. "The remaining performances," he said finally. "We'll need to discuss the arrangement." "Yes," Tobias said. "We will." He met Dale Coburn's eyes and held them. He wasn't angry. He wasn't triumphant. He was just very still, the way his mother was still when she was not going to be moved. Dale Coburn nodded once and left. Miriam found him 10 minutes later. She sat down on the floor next to him. Not without some effort, she would note loudly and without embarrassment, and they stayed there for a while without talking. "You're doing the rest of the run," she said. "I know. I'll make sure of it." "I know," he said again. Outside the green room, he could hear the lobby sounds, the coats, the conversations, the particular noise of an audience that has seen something and is trying to decide what to do with it. Someone laughed. Several people were talking at once. He could hear his name, not Tobias, just the young man who came on tonight, moving through the noise like something finding its shape. His mother was in that lobby. She'd had the night off and she'd come. She'd sat in the 9th row, in a seat she'd never sat in from this side, and she'd watched her son. He didn't know exactly what she was feeling. He didn't need to. He knew what it was made of. He finished the run, all 4 remaining performances. The Sunday matinee drew the largest audience of any Ridgecrest Young Players production in 6 seasons. The Halifax Chronicle Review, which ran on Monday, and which Tobias read on his phone while eating cereal in his kitchen, said, among other things, that the production had found something unexpected in its final weekend, something the reviewer described as the difference between depicting grief and actually knowing its address. Dale Coburn sent him an email the following Wednesday. It said that the young players would be grateful to have him return for the fall season, and that there would be a lead role, and that they looked forward to discussing the details at his convenience. He read the email twice. Then he put his phone down and finished his cereal. He wrote back 3 days later, not out of stubbornness, not to make a point, but because his mother had taught him that you respond when you are ready and not before, and that the people who matter most will still be there. The email he sent was short. He said he would be happy to meet. He said he had some questions about the season's casting process that he wanted to walk through before committing. He said he was looking forward to the conversation. He was, actually. He was looking forward to a great many things. There's something people say about talent, that it speaks for itself, that it rises, that it cannot be kept down forever. And there's truth in that. But What people don't usually say, the thing that gets left out of the cleaner version of the story, is that talent doesn't rise by itself. It rises because somebody stays. Somebody keeps showing up to the empty theater. Somebody keeps running the lines in the dark, not because anyone is watching, but because the work matters and they know it matters, even when no one else in the room is prepared to say so. Tobias Afolabi-Greene didn't get his moment because the world suddenly became fair. He got it because he was the most prepared person in the building when the moment arrived, and he had made sure, quietly, without announcement, without asking anyone's permission, that he would be ready. His mother cleaned that theater for 11 years. He walked onto its stage and made 200 strangers feel the full weight of their own inherited silence. That's the story. That's what it cost, and that's what it was worth.